Here we go. So in 2010, I was starting my PhD in biogerontology, aka aging biology. And I went to the National Institute on Aging, which is in Baltimore. And you can see it here. I found this from my phone 15 years ago. And I was pretty excited because I wanted to cure aging. And I figured that when I went to the National Institute on Aging, they would have a plan for accomplishing this goal. And that I felt that was important because generally when I play board games, for example, I like to sort of figure out how do you win at this thing? And then I like to formulate a plan, and then I usually win. But when I got to the National Institute on Aging, I learned that there was no plan and there was no intention of making a plan. And maybe we should cure aging, but most people didn't think so. So this was distressing. This was distressing to me, and I would say that in the 15 years since then, I've basically been trying to come up with a plan, a strategy. So let's make sure that there's a plan for longevity success. We're going to go through a whole lot of stuff. We're going to go through the whole, how does the field of longevity work? Where are we? And can we get there? Are we on track to get there? Can we get there? Etc. in half an hour. We're going to make a plan that involves defining what we actually want, which is healthy years and a rate of adding healthy years that ideally exceeds our aging. Then we're going to try to figure out how are healthy years produced. Then we're going to look at whether there are ways to make the input for this whole production function abundant. And then we're going to see what's in the way. Do we have enough throughput in our healthy year factory or not? And we're going to do that very fast. So right now, today, we are increasing our lifespan by something like 0.1 years per year. So 10% of the way to sort of longevity escape velocity. And that's been going on forever. And you see many lines here which indicate when the curve would bend, and the curve has not bent. So that is good. We are doing 10% of what we want to do, maybe a bit less because we want some buffer there. All of that progress is coming from this kind of system. There is some initial research that happens that comes up with ideas for how we can fix the things that go wrong with the human body and improve the human body. Then there's, and this often happens in academia and the NIA and so forth, then there's a phase in the middle where you have to take those ideas and sort of instantiate them into physical things that alter the human body, such as a pill or an injection of something. That typically happens in biotech companies or pharma companies. And then you need to see whether it all works. So you put them into humans in clinical trials. So that's our system for producing healthy years currently. There's some other things like sanitation and so forth. We're doing well on those in America, and we'll need to do well on this one if we want to keep the curve from bending. So what is the longevity field? In my assessment, as someone who's been in that field for about 20 years and pays close attention all of the time, how are we doing? My estimate is that new ideas that could be a medicine, doesn't have to be close, just like this could end up with a way that we make humans better, healthier. We get a couple per year, 2 to 5, something like that. Then quite a few of those actually get attempted as a biotech. I would say right now the field is commercializing faster than we are generating new science. So let's say half of those are turning into companies. And that usually takes 5 to 10 years before we can move on to the next phase. And then what is our success rate? We mostly don't know because the field only started producing these ideas, 20 years ago. The early 2000s is when we started having things that's like this could turn into a therapy. So we're just getting there now, and we have a bunch of clinical trials happening. The average success rate for drugs, just in general, going all the way from the idea to it works in humans is 1%. So let's put that as our cap. The longevity field is probably not doing better than that. If you ask a lot of people, they probably implicitly or explicitly would say, no, it's maybe 0, right? If they didn't think that, they would invest more money into it. So we're somewhere between 0 and 1% success. Let's say that, let's assume that if you have a drug that does something good for longevity, you get 2 years of lifespan out of it. So it's not we found this silver bullet and it cures everything and your lifespan is doubled. It's just, very serious effect, but, just part of the thing. And then your clinical trials are going to take 10 years. So now we have an output, which is what we were caring about, right? We had 0.1 years from all of biomedical research, and the aging field is going to be generating, starting roughly around now, somewhere between 0 and 0.04 years per year. So on the one hand, that's sad because it's low and we're like not on track to longevity escape velocity right now. On the other hand, if these assumptions are reasonable, it could be that like targeting these fundamental mechanisms of aging are actually adding like 10, 20% to the progress on life expectancy that we're getting. And in that sense, we are very much punching above our weight because the biomedical research field overall is like $250 billion a year in the US. So this is like every company, pharma company, all government funding for research, health research, and every nonprofit that does this stuff. And globally, it's more like 400 billion. And the aging field is something like maybe $500 million to $1 billion per year. There's roughly $1/3 billion or 0.4 from the US government. And then there's some nonprofits, and then there's a couple of big companies and some small companies and so forth. So we're getting less than 1%, considerably less than 1% of the funding. If we're able to contribute even 10% of the progress, that would be pretty amazing. But it is a tiny field. Why is it a tiny field? It is a tiny field, and that gives us an opportunity. So some of the things that I've been doing with my nonprofit hat on, which is Norn Group, is look at this small thing and say, hey, we could maybe change the numbers here. And I think probably many of the people in this room could change the numbers here because there's maybe like 500 labs doing longevity research, something like that. Maybe it's 1,000, but like that order of magnitude. And some of those are better than others. And so if you are really good, like if you're at Boyden or if you're half of Ed Boyden and you're like, I'm going to go do something here. You're high agency, you know how to use AIs, whatever. Like you could be adding some fraction to like the output of the entire field just by changing your own opinion. You could also maybe help other people do the same. And so in Norn Group, I've done multiple things that are sort of training programs, trying to help people who want to contribute to the field and are high talent, get the right taste in science and learn how to like do things. We also are trying to bring talent to the US through a program called Talent Bridge. And then we've done a grants program called Impetus Grants that gave away close to 150 grants to academic researchers, including many who were not working on aging before and who now have, done at least multiple things that are important for aging research. And that's producing papers and companies and so forth. But this is just like, kind of like me being annoyed and then some visionary donors who gave money for the grants and these different things. But it's like pretty small. It's like 10% of the NIH budget in 1 year. And maybe we've added at least single-digit percent competent people doing aging research. So that is, to me, promising, optimistic. We can actually do something. The field is so small that you can make a big difference individually. But let's also ask, why is the field so small? So here are 3 circles that each represent a number of dollars per year. And this is the amount of money that go into 3 different sort of 10-year projects. One of them is a treasury bond that will go for 10 years, and then you will get your money back. One of them is just medicine that is not longevity. So that's our $250 billion, right? And one of them is longevity R&D, which is less than $1 billion. The first one is much larger than the other 2. And the last one is much smaller than the other 2. Why is this? They are all 10-year projects if we think like going into clinical trials and so forth. But the first one, you are almost guaranteed to get your money back, right? If you're investing resources into this one, you will get what you are hoping for. In the second one, clinical trials, once we're at that stage, 5 to 10% success rates. So it's low, it's risky, but at least you can sort of model some kind of ROI and you can have a reasonable expectation that something will happen if you have a portfolio. The last one, as mentioned, there has not been a success in the longevity field. There is not a drug in humans that has been approved or even properly tested to like extend your lifespan. And so what is the probability? Maybe it's 0, right? Whenever it's a question mark, you have to like account for the possibility that it's 0. So that is, I think, discouraging. But maybe we can change that. So where we are so far, we have a tiny field that's generating a few ideas. We would like more ideas. If we can convince people that it's a real field, then we can get more people and more funding, and the field could grow an order of magnitude easily. from where it is right now. And that would give us more ideas, and then that would feed into our function, and we would get more healthy years out later. How can we do that? How can we do that right now? Are there feasible things that could happen? Obviously, the way we could do that is just like keep coming up with ideas, keep starting companies, and then like look for successes. Are there maybe faster ways that we could get to that convincing point? One idea is that you just prove that you can make dogs live longer, or cats, if you're a cat person. And there is a clinical trial ongoing right now from a company called Loyal that's trying to make big dogs live as long as small dogs. And if that works, then I think it's quite likely that, a commercial demonstration of the aging field can actually work would be convincing to some number of people, which would then feed back into the system. Another thing you can do is to not, obviously it's hard to run an aging trial. I think I just left that out as implicit, but it takes a while. Other things you could do is to look for ways that you can get readouts sooner. An example of this is the second most rapidly aging organ in the human body, which is the ovary. There's a very steep rate of decline at a certain age, if you're a woman, in your ovarian function. And one of the grants that we gave in this Impetus Grants program was to some researchers at Columbia to test a drug called rapamycin, which can robustly extend lifespan in mice, and put that into 50 human women and see whether treatment in a control trial, see whether the treatment will delay their decline in ovarian function. That should read out sometime end of this year. If that works, then not only do you have something that might be good for, all women, which is good in itself, but also you could have a way where we could run aging trials. If something that extends lifespan overall also can affect these surrogates that are meaningful and sort of tangible to the FDA, then you could imagine running many different aging drugs through these trials. And instead of it taking 10 years, it could take 5 years to finish all these trials. So I think there's both a paving the way here, and there's a possibility of like, hey guys, this field is real. We have had our first success. Success is not zero. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's not zero. And then that feeding back in and giving us more funding and more stuff happening. So that is cool. One challenge here is that it will still take a long time. So if we are relying on, hey, we are proving that this can succeed, and then we start getting more funding and more people starting to work in the field, then we will get more ideas, sort of ideally soon thereafter. But even so, we will have a long time before it benefits, say, all the people in this room or anyone else. So that we have a good plan, a reasonable plan for some things that could boost the field, but we would like more good stuff sooner. So let's see what we can do. Before we do that, I just want to pause. And I think I promised in the title that there would be 4 numbers. So let's just review the key numbers that we have looked at so far. One is what I think is the output. How many healthy years of life are we getting per year? If we get that number to 1.2, I think we're all very happy. The second one is this hypothesis output rate, or the number of new ideas per year. If we don't have any idea of what to do, we cannot do anything. And so to some degree, having things that we can put into that system is rate limiting. And currently it's very much rate limiting. Then the next number is how good are we at seeing whether the ideas work? Which ones should we bet on? So this is some kind of probability, estimating the probability of the human success. And then there is a lag time for that whole process to take place. So from idea to reaching the human. So I think these are the key numbers. One of them is just our output. The other 3 are sort of input numbers. And if we got those numbers to be better, the whole field would be doing something very meaningful. So, taking stock, just a few ideas, we want more. It's a small field, which gives us one opportunity for generating more ideas, just make it more plausible. The other big problem is that we don't know how hard it is, and therefore we kind of relying on a bit of idealism for people who want to engage with this stuff. So other than proving the success by just having a success, what are big levers that we can start pulling today? And maybe especially sort of apropos everything else going on around us, what would this production function look like if intelligence is very, very cheap? So if will Dario or Demis's dream come true, and like in 10 years we'll have solved all of diseases and so forth because we have AGI? Maybe, but I think that there are some things that we will be short on. For example, what is the training data for what will happen to the human body if we do X? Does that data exist? So, LLMs, we have a lot of language. We can train on this. Math is sort of formal. But in biology, there's a whole lot of dark matter. Like there are just whole things happening that we are unaware of. And like we find a new one every 5 years. And it's like, whoa, I didn't realize that like our genes were not just in the coding DNA, but actually all the other junk DNA is not junk. Who would have thought, right? It regulates this other thing. So there are these things we're not even aware of should be in the model. Maybe, and if AGI solves everything, then I'm happy too. So I'm planning for the scenario where it does not solve everything using the current data. What will it need? Well, I think you would want to map the manifold of sort of transitions between states in biology. And one way that you could do that is to just test what all the different, like if you have X is a thing you could do to a cell. Could you test what all the different things that you could do to a cell within the aging environment, what effect that would have? If you generated all of that data and you had very cheap intelligence, then you could generate hypotheses at probably at least 100x higher rate. So I will just leave it there and say, if we generate the right data, then we could make use of intelligence. If we had the right thing to apply intelligence to, we could generate the hypothesis output rate sooner. And we're only limited now by the time it takes to generate that data, not by the trials. Then let's look at the second stage. So where we are making new drugs. What will cheap intelligence do for us here? And what is it doing right now? So in general, any longevity biotech will take one of these ideas, then it will work hard for multiple years to make molecules that do put the idea into humans. And then it needs to get confident that this will benefit humans in clinical trials in order to, if nothing else, get people to pay for running those trials. And if we take a concrete example of that, a company called New Limit, some of you may know it, some of you may not, but they are pursuing one specific idea, which is a specific combination of what are called transcription factors, which is a type of protein, can sort of rejuvenate your cells. It's almost like going a little bit backwards towards when you were just an embryo and you were perfectly young, but just a little, not too much. So this is a cool idea from 2016 that they're now trying to instantiate, and the field is 9 years into that, and they're getting ready for trials in next year, so 10-year gap. They do this by putting mRNA, like the COVID vaccines, into lipid nanoparticles and then sticking them into your liver. They need to find the right sequences of RNA and so forth to have a proper effect. And then, like everyone else, they pick some disease. They're going after alcoholic liver disease, and then they do experiments in mice to show that it works. This part AI is helping us with. For example, AlphaFold will now allow us to model proteins much more effectively, and you could use that to make protein drugs. You could also use it to find the spot where your little chemical should bind to a protein and so forth. China is also just better at this than the US for usual reasons. Well, yeah, there's a book on this, I hear. So this is being accelerated. And here's a curve from New Limit showing that their super cool AI techniques can make this faster and learn faster than their iteration speed. That is good, and that will shorten our lag. What AI is not, I have seen no good demonstration of AI doing this thing better. Basically saying this is what is going to work when we go and do clinical trials. That is, of course, creating a gap, a bottleneck, because we could make more and more and more and more molecules. Unless we find more targets to go after, more biological ideas to go after, then we just have more molecules and more competition. Peter Thiel does not approve. So what we want is to get better at picking those molecules. If we had that, if we had faith in this is how we can pick, then even before we run the clinical trials, we can push this faith backwards, and get more funding for the field. In addition to, we can actually pick better things to put into clinical trials, right? So the overall system becomes much more efficient. Could we do that? And here, for reasons of time, I will sort of pause at maybe we could find a molecular way to measure biological age. Maybe you've heard of Brian Johnson, who supposedly spends $2 million a year optimizing his health and will tweet out, here's my biological age. I'm 36 or whatever. What he's using there is something that the field has been developing for 13 years called aging clocks that are based on some machine learning regression of different things you could measure in like a blood test. Most of these clocks are sort of black box. It's just like, oh, these sites in DNA seem to correlate with age. If these tests really told you your biological age, then we would all be crazy for not taking them all the time. And in fact, I think your insurance company would probably force you to take them or at least give you some money back if you did, right? Unfortunately, what has yet to happen for these clocks, what we are doing with these clocks is we measure something at some point in time, and then we predict the correlation of the things we measure with like how much time has passed, which is pretty good. It's extra good if you're a wristwatch because that's what we want a wristwatch to do. But if we want to use these clocks for the purpose I'm describing, which is knowing what actually works, then we need to know that the clock will respond accordingly when we do an intervention in a way that's meaningful. Meaning if the clock changes, you will live longer, right? And, wristwatches can serve as an example here. They do not have this function. My watch can be perfectly good at predicting 24 hours ago it was yesterday. But if I turn the dial 6 hours back, I have not actually traveled through time, right? I've just changed the clock. So unfortunately, no one yet has run an experiment where you take a bunch of interventions, even in mice, and that we know will change lifespan, and then done the bottom part here, which is, treat some mice, don't treat other mice, or treat them with things that we know don't work. Then, after the treatment, measure their clocks, and then ask whoever developed this clock, hey, can you tell me whether this mouse will live longer without knowing what treatment was given? This has not happened for 13 years. At this point, I'm frankly pissed off. So therefore, again, the nonprofit has sort of put together the plan of making this happen. This is something that could happen for like $1 to $2 million. We would have consumer reports for how we measure biological age. All your biological age tests would become more meaningful. Even Brian Johnson would now have greater accuracy, but it would be for everyone. This would be, I think, a good thing to do. And then there would be much more work to do to like make sure it really maps to humans, but there are ways that you can do that. So here's another thing that we could do for $1 or $2 million that would bring the field meaningfully forward in our ability to predict what works and what not works. So that's good news again, in a sense. It's sad news that we haven't done it, but it's good news that like we could just do this, right? Again, we can impact the rate of progress in our field. And so if we did this a few things, if we did something like Gordian that allows us to test stuff in aged environments at 100x scale, then you could have 100 times more ideas being tested each year. So let's take our 2 to 5 and just go for the lower end, but then 100x it. Now we have 200 ideas per year. Then the constraint becomes, okay, we have all these ideas. How many of them can we really test? How many of them can we make drugs for? AI is helping with can we design a way to test it pretty well, but we'll still have to run animal experiments and human studies. If we had good evals, we could be smart about doing that. And so now maybe we take the best 20% of our stuff, we move it through in 5 instead of 5 to 10 years because of AI. And we've reduced our lag. We can use the biomarkers that we talked about in the clinical part as well. And if we just achieve 1% success rate, so just the same as like drugs for diseases, now this all math works out to 0.8 years per year. There are some assumptions here of stuff working, but they're not dramatic assumptions. I'm not like promising doubling lifespan with a single intervention or anything like that. I'm just creating a production function that tests a lot of theses and is able to pick good ones. So I think it is quite feasible that we could actually make much more progress in the longevity field if we do some few things right. I think I'm out of time, so I'm just going to leave this up there, read more about all kinds of things, and then immediately afterwards, there will be more detail about the Gordian and the scaling up testing part.